Greetings to all in the love and light of the one infinite creator. Welcome to the Seattle Law of One podcast. The topic of today's episode is Christ consciousness. As anyone familiar with the Law of One knows, there are many Christian overtones and undertones in the Confederation teachings channeled by our friends at L&L Research, largely, we can assume, because of Carla Rueckert's and Jim McCarty's devout Christian faith. Who was Jesus Christ from a Law of One perspective, and how can our understanding of this entity help us in our individual and collective spiritual growth? Let's find out. My name is Jonathan Tong, and I'm facilitator for the Seattle Law of One study group. We can be found on the list of study groups on the L&L Research page shown on your screen. We do also have a Facebook group, and we do meet on Zoom twice a week. Tuesdays, 3 to 5 p.m. Pacific time, and Saturdays, 8 to 10 a.m. Pacific time. You don't have to live in Seattle or anywhere near Seattle to join our study group or our Zoom meetings. Anybody who's interested is welcome to. Just contact us at seattlelawofone@gmail.com. To get on our mailing list, we send out weekly updates to let you know what we're doing that week and the Zoom links. We do also have a YouTube channel and encourage you to subscribe to it to get notifications when we upload episodes of our podcast series, as well as Q&As with Jim McCarty, Austin Bridges, Gary Bean, and Tricia Bean from the L&L Research channeling team. If you're watching on your TV, we do have episodes divided into chapters, so you can skip through by chapters if you don't want to watch the whole thing all the way through. If you're watching on your computer, you should see a list of topics and timestamps, and you can click on the timestamp to go to the topics of interest to you. As mentioned, our topic for today is our topic for today is Christ consciousness. Let's go ahead and meet our panelists. Panelists, if you can let our viewers know who you are, where you're calling from, and maybe a little bit about your Christian background, just in a couple sentences would be nice. I, for example, am Jonathan Tong, and I'm from Seattle, Washington, and I did not grow up in a church, but I did start going to church in my early 30s. And yes, I was a very devout Christian, regular church-going person for about 20 years, but I did leave the church in 2019. And how about Joanna? Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Joanna. I am in Ventura, California, and I was very much a Christian. I grew up in the church, self-proclaimed Jesus freak and all of that, very judgy. And of course, I didn't know it because I am saved and a very righteous person and all of those things. And I'm just so blessed after becoming an atheist and all these things to arrive now at this point where I can reclaim Jesus back into my life as a wonderful model for how to be and how to access God and oneness. So
Beautiful.
I love these conversations.
Yeah, I am so looking forward to it. Keith, would you like to introduce?
Yeah, happy to. Keith Toussaint. I'm calling from New Orleans, though I will mention at least I spent over 20 years in Seattle, which is actually one of the reasons why I gravitated to the group, I suppose. I've had church experience throughout my life. I grew up in the Southern Baptist tradition. Many family members, ministers, and ran churches. In my 20s, so I kind of didn't spend much time in church, but I was also very much involved in spiritual sort of self-learning. Then later, when my children got older, I joined the Presbyterian Church, and because of the nature of the appointment, I can say now I'm still a Presbyterian elder because it's a lifelong appointment. So you never are not an elder. And during that time, I spent a lot of time looking into the life of Jesus, and I'm really interested in having this discussion from a Law of One perspective.
Thank you so much for being here. Yes, looking so forward to this. Rhonda, would you like to introduce?
Yes, Rhonda White, calling in from Birmingham, Alabama. I grew up in a Christian home and most of my adult life employed by Christian organizations, whether that be higher education institutions or secondary education. And part of that time with the Jesuits. I'm a Presbyterian currently. I do spiritual direction, still connected with that Jesuit tradition. I believe it's a great way. They have a way of getting into contemplative prayer that I believe is a great way to connect with yourself and Jesus as a model or example. So it's still very dear to me, my faith, my Christian faith. And of course, I view it very differently than I did 20 years ago, 30 years ago, always changing and evolving, but very much a part of who I am. So,
Indeed. What a great panel this is. What a great discussion we're going to have. I did want to remind our viewers, as always, that none of us here are experts in the law of one or on Christianity. We are normal people like you, just hanging out and sharing our thoughts and opinions on things of a spiritual nature that we consider important. But anything we say could be wrong, and you're welcome to disagree with anything or everything that any of us say. So let's go ahead and get started. We should note that much has been said about the entity known as Jesus Christ in channeling sessions for the last 40 plus years. For some students of the law of one, too much has been said, and that it can be a little bit off-putting for those who may have had negative experiences or associations with Christianity or the church, organized church. A lot has been said about who Jesus was, what his mission was, and about the accuracy of what has been said in the Bible or not. We're not going to be able to cover everything in there. We will inevitably leave a lot out. But as the title suggests, our main focus is going to be on Christ consciousness. Also, we're going to assume that if you're watching this, you're already familiar with the law of one, with the process of channeling, and with the entities known as Ra, Quo, and the Confederation of Planets. If that is not the case, you'll probably want to go back and watch the second episode of our podcast on Law of One 101 to give you a little better context for everything that we are talking about. So before we get deeper into our topic, we should talk a little bit about Carla and Jim's Christianity. Carla was a very devout Christian, for those who didn't know this. She sang in her Episcopal Church choir for 60 years, starting at age 4. I just learned this recently from Jim, but he said that she would have started sooner, but she was not physically big enough to carry the hymnal from the back of the church to the choir area. So can you imagine a little girl at age 4 singing with a bunch of old people? Holy smokes. It is also worth noting that when channeling Ra, she always had a Bible open to the first page of the Gospel of John behind her head, along with the chalice and along with the candle. And that she continued challenging in the name of Jesus when channeling Quo and other Confederation entities. So yes, she was a very, very devout Christian. Probably not in a way that conservative Christians might say is, but for anyone else, I would think, yes, very clearly devoted. Jim McCarty did attend a Presbyterian church in junior high and high school, but decided he did not want to continue after that. He did have a very personal come to Jesus moment in 2015. He also challenges in the name of Jesus when channeling Quo, etc. So he is also what we consider to be a very devout Christian. So let's see, how about if we go ahead and take a look at some birth stories here. In a December 14th, 1986 session, just about 10 days before Christmas, Quo said, "The question this evening has to do with the season, more specifically the birth of Christ, the life of Christ, and whether there may be any discrepancies in the time, place, and what he had to teach, and a couple of side queries along the line of virgin birth, how it was accomplished, the meaning of Christmas to Jesus. We cannot speak about what this instrument calls the virgin birth and invoke the law of confusion, saying only that each new soul first awakened to its perception of itself as an eternal being has experienced the virgin birth. The event was difficult, and the birth was indeed humble, though brightened by an optical illusion, shall we say, a most unusual configuration within the heavens, which caused there to appear for some time of your months an unusually bright cluster of light in the night sky. You ask what Jesus the Christ would think of the way your people celebrate Christmas. My friends, Jesus is very pleased. He is pleased to see all that is given and received of love, generosity, and cheerfulness. This entity never confused the personal life that he lived with the Christ he channeled, and in the end gave way to completely, but always knew the source and called it the Father. Call it what you will, we have no dogma or doctrine, but celebrate love. It is the Creator who is pleased that those who do celebrate the spiritual advent of light into darkness, yet that Creator will also celebrate the same event on another level in each of your lives, whatever your season of Christmas tide may be, whenever your star beckons. Person named Jay asks, could you explain the configuration of which you spoke in the skies that created the optical illusion of illumination or cluster of light at the time of the birth of Christ? I am quo, and we pause in order to allow this instrument to move somewhat more deeply into the meditative state. The patterns of light that became obviously apparent to the physical eye of those within the vicinity of that known as the Holy Land were produced by an unusual alignment of both planets and constellations of stars that seemed to focus their brilliance upon a point which seemed far nearer your Earth planet by even than your moon, so that there was projected from this alignment of celestial bodies a focus for their light that approached this planetary sphere at a focal point which was seen as a sign to those who studied the skies, and more especially the stars. Jay asks, was this configuration or alignment of the celestial bodies coincidental, or was it to fulfill the prophecy of the birth of Jesus the Christ? I am quo, and we may note that this alignment was a cyclical event, which was an integral portion of the evolutionary cycle of your planetary sphere, which provided a doorway of kind through the metaphysical realms, shall we say, that was the signal for the opportunity for the one known as Jesus to begin its service in the fashion which became known as its incarnational experience. There was one other passage worth noting about the Star of Bethlehem. This was from April 9th, 1985, and this was the Confederation entity called Lytos, or Latos. I'm not totally sure how to pronounce it, but I'm going to say Lytos. I am Lytos, and we feel that we may best describe the relationship of the so-called Star of Bethlehem and others with the one that has become to known as Jesus of Nazareth as he entered your third density physical illusion. The occasion can be seen much as the send-off that a great and varied grouping of friends may give one of its own as it goes off upon a long and lonely journey to a distant land, that is in, shall we say, great distress, and calls with great intensity for the services that all within this family of entities have to offer. And these services then shall be individualized and manifested by one of the group, and in this case, the one was known and is known among your peoples as Jesus of Nazareth, the Christed one. Yeah, sorry for reading through all that, but it just seems so beautiful to me and worth sharing for folks who have not seen it before. But I really love that idea of the Star of Bethlehem being some sort of, whatever it was that was, planets or constellations that did it. The point is there was a really bright light in the sky, which in a way was kind of an opening of a metaphysical gateway and ascending off of this entity into a distant land. What a beautiful visual. Joanna, did you have any thoughts, reflections on anything from these two passages?
Yeah, I have to say I've never once considered Jesus's natal chart and what that could have looked like, because this is what it talks about. It's talking about, the heavens and the planets and the stars, right? And how it aligned as he came into the world. And because, like it says in the Law of One, every wanderer that incarnates in third density becomes a fully third density being. Of course, he had a natal chart. Of course, stars aligned in some way, the same way it does for all of us, and it has significance. And I just wondered, what could that have been like? And I asked ChatGPT, like, what kind of, speculations have there been? And it was very interesting if you guys are interested in doing that on your own time, but like potentially like under a
But we
conjunction.
don't know the exact birth date
No,
of
we
this
don't.
entity, right? So how do you do a birth chart if you don't know the actual dates?
Oh, I didn't expect to get a birth chart, but I was like considering that there's a big star that was bright in the
Oh,
sky.
yeah.
What are some of the speculations that astrologers have had? And every 20 years, there's a Saturn and Jupiter conjunction. And they're saying there was a time, about 2000 years ago where it was closest to the Earth that could have produced a lot of light or something. So it was just it's all speculative and it has no bearing on our spiritual journeys at all, but still fun to think about. And I've never thought about it before. So I just thought that was very interesting to think about.
Yeah, that is interesting, and something I never thought about either. Keith, did you have any thoughts, reflections on anything here?
Yes. I want to start with the last thing that was mentioned, though, because it's fresh. The way I'm reading this passage, I've got it right here, the unusual alignment, this is part of the ones you highlighted, of both planets and constellations, etc., made it seem to focus their brilliance upon a point which seemed nearer to Earth. So I'm imagining that occurrence being something that was perhaps visible to those in proximity of the birth, but perhaps not visible in other parts of the globe, which is why it would not have been recorded in the astrological charts as some anomalous phenomenon. And that's something that I know comes up a lot in the context of the historical Jesus. People, speculate about how could it be that this occurrence could happen and have it not be recorded in astronomers of the time. And that's a very, possible and tenable explanation. But the overall passage, and maybe we're going to get to this a little bit later, is just a reminder of how the law of one material refers to Yeshua as one who is journeying into third density, with a purpose, and I was looking for other passages, but even in some cases, they've been alluded to the idea that this wasn't the only planet he
Right. Right. Yes, we will be getting into that before long, for sure.
I'll press the pause button on that when I can't wait to get that part. All right.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing all that. Rhonda, did you have any thoughts, reflections on anything here?
Yes, I do. First, in that first passage, when it asked, and it says that about how Jesus viewed the way we celebrate Christmas, that one really resonated with me. That it said that that he very pleased. I think that's the word it says. Very pleased with the way we celebrate. So that gives me a little joy, and I just want to share why, as a personal experience, that I think Joanna said Jesus freak. I probably could have been called that earlier in my life as well. And so when my daughter was young, I was trying to figure out how to celebrate Christmas in a way that was balanced at what I thought was balanced at the time. So I had come up with the concept that maybe I should not do Santa Claus. I would never tell her that he was real, like that, that he was fun, and we did him. Like, we took pictures with him. We weren't anti-Santa Claus. My sister-in-law was a preschool teacher, and she was furious. She's like, look, if your daughter ruins it for my 3 kids, then, and oddly, and it's funny too. So talking about the magic. So she was a preschool teacher. She passed away in 2014. It's why we moved to Birmingham. But to this day now, I cherish the fact she loved Christmas, and she did everything Christmas. And one of the things that she taught to me that I wish I knew then, I would have listened to then, was the fact that little kids they have that magical period of thinking and development, and they don't know the difference between real and not real. And Christmas time, for all of us, we can reclaim it, can be a time where we can be children again, and that magic, that anything can happen. And so I'm glad to hear that Jesus is pleased with the way that we celebrate Christmas, because if you look at it legalistically, you can start, all the things you could say. It's commercialized, it's, whatever. But if you bring joy and celebration and magic to it, it's a wonderful time of the year. So that was one thing I wanted to say. One more thing I wanted to add, kind of leading on what Keith was saying too about the concept of whether, and it starts out talking about whether his birth was, they don't want to invoke, if they were to talk about the virgin birth, that would be kind of invoking the law of confusion. So I have found in my spiritual direction, this is one of the things we contemplate. You spend some time contemplating is the birth of Jesus. And I find that it's good to look at it both ways in terms of, and when I say both ways, I mean like the historical Jesus, and actually spend some time in the story, maybe the way you learned it as a child, maybe being with some of the different characters. For example, I had one retreatant who was doing trying to consider whether she was going to go through IVF. And so she really resonated with Elizabeth in the story. Mary's, the birth of Jesus is Mary's cousin, I believe. And so, but then that very last line, I always try to get my people it's really nice to contemplate Jesus's birth, like that last one where it says this is an occasion of a send-off with very group of friends may give. To think of your send-off, in terms of maybe all the people there that were sending you off when you came, just like Joanna was talking about your birth chart and Jesus' birth chart, the commonalities we have with Jesus. It's really,
That's beautiful.
So there's beautiful things to think of it in a historical perspective, a symbolic perspective. Both ways.
Interesting. Yeah, thank you all for sharing that. I would like to, the passages we've been looking at are referring to birth stories that are told in various ways in the Bible. I'd like to go ahead and take a look at some passages about Jesus' childhood, and specifically some events that are not recorded in the Bibles that most people read in their churches. This was from the Raw Contact, session 17. Question 19, the questioner, Don, asks, how did Jesus learn this during his incarnation? Ra says, I am Ra. This entity learned the ability by a natural kind of remembering at a very young age. Unfortunately, this entity first discovered his ability to penetrate intelligent infinity by becoming the distortion you call angry at a classmate. This entity was touched by the entity known as Jesus to you and was fatally wounded. Thus, the one known as Jesus became aware that there dwelt in him a terrible potential. This entity determined to discover how to use this energy for the good, not for the negative. This entity was extremely positively polarized and remembered more than most wanderers do. Question 20. Questioner, how did this aggressive action against a playmate affect Jesus in his spiritual growth? Where did he go after his physical death? Ra, I am Ra. The entity you call Jesus was galvanized by this experience and began a lifetime of seeking and searching. This entity studied first day and night in its own religious constructs, which you call Judaism, and was learned enough to be a rabbi, as you call the teach learners of this particular rhythm or distortion of understanding, at a very young age. At the age of approximately 13 and 1/2 of your years, this entity left the dwelling place of its earthly family, as you would call it, and walked into many places, other places, seeking further information. This went on sporadically until the entity was approximately 25, at which time it returned to its family dwelling and learned and practiced the art of its earthly father. When the entity had been able to integrate or synthesize all its experiences, the entity began to speak to other selves and learn what it had felt during the preceding years to be of a worthwhile nature. The entity was absolved karmically by the destruction of an other self when it was in its last portion of lifetime and spoke upon what you would call a cross, saying, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. In forgiveness lies the stoppage of the wheel of action, or what you call karma. Fascinating passages for anyone who has not seen or heard of these stories before. And it is worth noting there is a gospel that was not chosen to be included in the Bible called the Infancy Gospel of Thomas. It's not the same thing as the Gospel of Thomas. That is a separate set of writings by a different person. But if you Google up infancy gospel of Thomas, you'll find that, yeah, there is a story of Jesus taking the life of another boy. He and the boys were apparently playing in a stream. Jesus was making sparrows out of clay and using some kind of magic to gather water from the rushing stream into pools and purifying it. Someone summoned their father because he was doing it during the Sabbath, which is a violation of the Sabbath. So Jesus commands the clay sparrows to come to life, and they fly away. Amazed, the adults go back to report it to the elders. Some other boy who was a son of one of the Jewish scholars takes a willow branch and like breaks up the pools of water that Jesus had collected. And Jesus gets angry and says, "Damn you, you irreverent fool. What harm did the ponds of water do to you? From this moment, you too will dry up like a tree, and you'll never produce leaves or root or bear fruit." And the boy withers on and dies at that point. So, yeah, interesting confirmation, I suppose you could say, of what Ross said in these two sessions. And fascinating that that karma followed him for the rest of his life until on the cross, he asked God to forgive the people who are killing him, basically, for they know not what they do, which I would assume would be an explanation of what Jesus did as a child also. He didn't know what he was doing. Powerful stories. Keith, any thoughts, reflections on any of this?
Yeah,
Are you there, Keith?
I am. Yeah, I haven't muted myself. I was mulling over the. Oh yeah, right. You didn't see my camera didn't click on because I was thinking and not talking. Well, yeah, this is new material for me. So in a sense, I'm absorbing it, and even the first time reading it before preparing for this, I didn't know what to make of it. And
Yeah,
in other words,
it's tricky, huh?
yeah, it's of a piece with other of the raw material of the Law of One material. In as much as this is the kind of thing that the fourth density entity that is incarnating Jesus would, you can imagine it being set up pre-incarnationally as a way to remind him of who he is, so that he can do what he came to do, right? Without a catalyst of that nature, you could imagine him thinking that he's ordinary, or
Well, that's the thing that strikes me fascinating as I'm reading this and I'm reading the account. If we're going to take the infancy gospel story seriously, then Jesus was doing all sorts of other magical things before this. This could not have been the first time that he had been seen doing interesting magical things. That's kind of trippy.
I can imagine him. Yeshua was doing that thing again, Mom.
Yeah, and he's doing it on the Sabbath. You're not supposed to be doing that on the Sabbath.
Always gets in trouble for that one.
Right.
I guess. Rhonda, did you have any thoughts, reflections on anything here?
Well, I do like the fact that it says that he wondered, like, I love to contemplate what they call the hidden years of Jesus, but that he traveled, it says he traveled many places before coming back, I believe, in here. And I did my senior paper in high school on Joseph of Arimathea, and there's a lot of legends around the fact that, well, so that's probably his uncle, they think, probably, and that Joseph of Arimathea, what we know about him in the Bible is that he gave his grave for Jesus to be buried in, his tomb. And the thought is that he probably was, or he might have been like a trader, spice trading. And there's legend of Joseph of Arimathea being up in England, and the hawthorn tree in front of Glasgow. So there's like a whole legend about that. So it's it's interesting to think about the fact that he really probably did maybe wander around and see a lot. So when you hear people who have stories about Jesus in other places, well, maybe there's something to him. So, yeah.
Indeed. Yeah, I find that fascinating, just to contemplate where he went and who he studied under. And I think there are other channeling sessions, quote channeling sessions, where they do talk more at length about that. And maybe we'll come back to that another time. Joanna, did you have any thoughts, reflections on anything here?
Yeah, actually I do. Firstly, I agree with Keith on the fact that the murder of this boy is a very strong catalyst for Jesus, not because he realized his power, but also that he can be capable of destruction with it. Not just fun, making sparrows or whatever, but it could be very destructive. And that therefore it gave him that moment of choice that we have in third density. What are you going to use it for? And obviously he chose to use it for good. And I particularly was drawn to where they were talking about karma and how he said, forgive them for they know not what they do, because um, Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, right? So he represents a model for humanity. And in this moment, he's really showing us what it means to repent and to forgive, which really actually recently I just had that message in one of my meditations of how repentance and forgiveness happens in the same moment. And I think this is an example of that because he was in that moment being killed by anger at the hands of another, right? And so he became the sin that he committed. And when he said, forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do, I agree with you, Jonathan. He's also forgiving himself for what he did. So it's this powerful, because he's the way and the truth. He's like, here's a model for what forgiveness looks like. It's not, and people get lost in it, like, oh my God, he's just so amazing and sinless that he's able to forgive his murderers. But that's just half the story. It's the other part where you have to forgive yourself. And that's in the law of one too. It's like forgiveness isn't just about forgiving other people, it's forgiving yourself. So this is the moment where it's like he's forgiving himself. And it's repentance that is based on love. I know that word repent is just loaded, especially for a recovering Christian like myself. It's just it's an ugly word.
What's your definition of repent?
For me now, especially after that message I got in my meditation, it means that you have displayed empathy. Like the reason I got that was because I was in mom guilt mode at the end of the day. I know moms understand that, where you're just like, oh my gosh, I was so short. I was just regretting how I treated my daughter that day and how I was dismissive of something and was on my phone trying to do something or whatever. And then I repented because I put myself in her situation and the pain or that would cause, and it's a repentance based on love because I don't want to cause that pain. And at the same moment, I have to forgive myself too. So it's like that true repentance happens at the same time as forgiveness because it's based on love. Like the kind of repentance that some Christians, the ones that I don't identify with, where it's based on fear and shame, that's hard to have happen with forgiveness, and forgiveness is what stops karma. So I just thought that this was a beautiful representation of Jesus becoming his sin and being able to forgive not just the people doing it, but at the same time forgiving himself.
Well said. Yeah, it was a really beautiful thoughts, reflections from everybody. I always enjoy these conversations because people point out things that I didn't see or hadn't thought of in particular. So I'm really enjoying this. There was one part that I wanted to highlight maybe as a segue into our next topic, and that is this part where Jesus was described as being extremely positively polarized and remembering more than most wanderers do. Let's take a look at some passage where we talk about Jesus as the Son of God. This was from a session on January 7th, 1990. It has been edited for brevity, much like many of the passages we look at here. On this question, Jim asked, what does it mean to be a son of God, and how do we manifest that? Is it possible to, in our lives, was Jesus the only Son of God? I am quo. The phenomenon known to you as Jesus is a principle of the logos, or love, that has moved through the densities as any other entity, but was created slightly different than those of you who swim beneath the sea of illusion. This entity also wished to live a life that was a poem to the Creator, and again, on planet after planet, this entity comes into incarnation with the special character of partial remembrance. In other words, this entity contains more of the logos, or love, than free will, whereas each of you contain the bonding of love and free will, against which you must challenge yourself to find a unity of being. This entity was a good teacher of the message of the law of one. Again and again, the message is misunderstood. Again and again, the Creator sends forth that special part of itself which contains the consciousness of unconditional love, rather than having it disappear beneath the veil. This entity has helped many, many civilizations. Each of you is equally son or daughter, heir or heiress, Christ of God, but each of you are deeply enmeshed in a negatively oriented mundane world. You do not have the ability which this special entity had to perceive and do the Creator's will and joy, no matter what the circumstances, no matter what the cost. However, each of you is brother or sister to the Christ principle. The Christ principle resides within each of you. You are Christ, but you are separated from the knowledge of that portion of yourself that you may feel iniquitous, guilty, angry, frustrated, and disharmonious, and thereby offer to yourselves the catalyst which is needed for growth and polarization in the choices that you make to serve others or to serve the self. Yes, my friends, there is only one Christ, but it is a consciousness, a principle that can incarnate and incarnate and incarnate again. When it incarnates, its only difference is that it does not forget that which all those upon your sphere do forget: the glory, the wonder, the beauty, the peace, the laughter, the love, and the light of the one infinite Creator. It is not impossible for you to move along the path that the Christ consciousness has shown for you. For you too are the sons and daughters of the Infinite One. And as you meditate and slowly become more and more conversant with the deep self which is worthy, limitless, and eternal, you may find yourself humbly pleased that you are able to be a servant of the principle of love. More than a few years later, on May 11th, 2022, Austin asked a question that I had submitted. I'm actually the J person in this passage.
Oh,
Yeah. It was something I had wondered about. When I first read that passage about Jesus incarnating on planet after planet, helping many, many civilizations, let's just say I had questions in my mind. So Austin says, we have one from Jay who writes, in a session on January 7th, 1990, you said that the entity we refer to as Jesus Christ has lived again and again on a planet after planet and has helped many, many civilizations. Understanding the need for you not to unduly influence our free will decisions related to Christianity or Christians on Earth, can you share with us some stories of how the entity we know as Jesus incarnated on other planets? And do they often involve crosses and or crucifixions? I am Quo, and I am aware of your query, my brother. You have asked a query which is fascinating to us, as it is the path of the martyr, the path of the one who lays down his life for those that are in darkness and who need to see the light. This entity is what you would refer to as a wanderer who has incarnated many times upon many third density planets for the purpose of sharing, most especially, the love of the one infinite Creator with those whom it sought to teach and to become a way shower. For through many incarnations that it chose as a specialty of its beingness, this type of service is somewhat unlike what most wanderers offer as their own particular specialties when they answer the call of a third density planet to serve in some manner to provide more light, more love, and illumination to the population of that planet, so that the veil of forgetting of the third density experience may in some fashion be penetrated and allow more of the nature of the unified creation to be perceived by those from the wanderer, whom the wanderer seeks to aid, if it is able to remember its mission within the troubled times and the nature of the third density experience. The one known as Jesus was able many times to answer a call from a third density planet that was dwelling in what you might see as metaphysical darkness. Such a population is at the beginning stages of determining the purpose of your life experiences, and in many cases is not able to find a clear path of understanding the nature of the personal and group incarnated energy expenditures, as you may call them. It is in such a situation that that one such as Yehoshua, as he is most often known in the metaphysical realms, is able to offer itself as a way shower, as one who has traveled this path many times itself, and who wishes to share the fruits of this journey and those who are just beginning the journey. This oftentimes results in what you may call various degrees of sacrifice, which is shown or represented by what you have called the cross, the intersection of one direction upward into the heavens with the intersection of the horizontal plane of the earth that is able to be transcended by those who understand and practice the principles of service to others to the extent that they give all that they have, the life experience, the joys, the sorrows, the purpose of being, in order to exemplify the sacrifice of the earthly perceptions and even the earthly life for the one known as Jehoshua, so that others may see there is more, much more to the life experience than has ever been perceived before becoming aware of the teachings of the one known as Jehoshua. Therefore, we can say that this entity has incarnated at various times upon many third density planets that have been able to receive these basic spiritual or metaphysical teachings, that the life experience is that which is meant, in the positive sense, to be dedicated to or given over to the serving of others that may be seen to be brothers and sisters of the one seeking to serve. This exemplar, known as Jehoshua, has been able to produce this presence of the one infinite creator as a means by which to perform what you would call miracles of healing, of teaching, of giving inspiration to those who do not know that there is a greater reality that each is destined to experience upon the spiritual path that the one known as Jehoshua has laid out before all aspirants or followers of the creed of the love of the one infinite creator, being the primary creative force within the one infinite creator and within each entity that moves and lives and has his being within that one creator. Man, there is so much to unpack in there. There is so much to see and to ponder and to reflect on. This whole idea that Jesus has not just been on this planet, but on other planets, really an amazing thing. I mean, which makes sense. I mean, if he's the Son of God, then God is everywhere in the universe. I mean, which means must be on other planets, other worlds as well. But it would appear that part of the mission of his incarnation on every planet involves sacrifice, and that how it often involves something related to a cross, because as we will see shortly, yeah, the cross is something that goes deep, deep, deep into the archetypical mind, the very blueprint of our third density existence here. So yeah, the idea that he would willingly, knowingly sacrifice himself again on planet after planet after planet to be a way shower, to show them that there is more to this life than they think, and that nothing, not even death, can hold you back. It's really powerful. Rhonda, did you have any thoughts, reflections on any of this stuff?
Oh yeah, like you said, it's so hard to know where to start, but I'll start at the beginning. One where it says that this person, that this way shower has more leaning towards the love than the free will. And I love, and going back again, I think this is very, like you are hitting on a key part of the archetypical mind. And I keep thinking again that when you study Jesus, he's always says, not my will be done, but the Father's will, and also we know in the Law of One material, it says the crystallized healer does not have will. So I keep going back. I think it's a great thing for a Law of One student to contemplate the three distortions the first three distortions of love, light, and free will. And it's, to me, my understanding is, the more I contemplate this, is that that you have, of course, the original thought, or the first thing, we're all one. It's that, and then there's this illusion that's created. It's kind of at a moment that those three things, even though they're listed as a first, second, and third, that they happen all at the same time. And to think of, and so I in my mind, I'm thinking of kind of a triangle that keeps going to the point of itself, right? A triangle of those free will, love, light, going back. And you can do that in lots of systems that have the idea of Trinity. But it seems in this passage, it's saying that Jesus was a little more balanced on the love side, and that he just, eventually learned how to completely give over his free will to that of the Creator. So I myself,
Yeah, to be able to
contemplate what
transcend
means.
that basic survival skill that means you want to stay alive, to be able to transcend that in the name of love.
Yes, and that's beautiful. And I one thing that has been very helpful prayer for me lately is just to think about what is currently happening, like in terms of that, what we're here in the law of one is that the reason the experience is happening is that the Creator wants to experience himself. So the fact that we are, whatever the reality is we're in, it's our kind of job is not the right word to say, but that's kind of maybe we'll take, but it whatever is happening to us at this moment is what we have created for the Creator. And to be able to say, no matter what's happening, thanks be to God, for this is the will of the Lord for me. There's a real gift in that. Like, that's a real, and there's so many layers when that little simple statement that you can just unpack when you're, whether it's not always, a lot of times you can say that, you're taught to say that in bad situations, but you can say that, start saying it in great situations. Thanks be to God, for this is the will of the Lord for me. Like, what is happening in that particular moment.
Yeah, and I think that really is the essence of the service to others path, which they have said is acceptance of Creator's will over your own. Joanna, did you have any thoughts, reflections on anything here?
Yeah, I'm with Rhonda in that there's a significance there in seeing, what the will of God is being, kind of shown through Jesus and done through Jesus, because according to these passages, he was human like the rest of us, but he just had a higher level of awareness of God. Like, there's more God light energy flowing through him, which allowed him to do these miracles and everything. But it also took away a lot of his free will, because he is the Son of God, in that he is God's representative. But I love these passages too, because there's just this equal balance of, like, Jesus being special, but not, you know what I mean? Like, where, because obviously with the, perspective of oneness, there isn't one better than the other. So it was just so beautiful to read these passages and see how it's honoring Jesus, but it's also not putting him on some pedestal,
What do you think of the meaning of the term way shower? That was something that kind of jumped out at me. Does that term have a particular meaning for you, or how do you think that applies here?
I love it, because someone who is a way shower knows the way, right? And it's a guide. There's nothing egotistical about it. The way that, say, like, corporate America envisions leadership, it's very aggressive, very like, oh, they're better than everyone else. So to me, this idea of a way shower is like servant leadership, where it's motivated by bringing people with you, as opposed to standing on a pedestal by yourself. And I think that's what made Jesus so amazing. And the fact that he didn't become a king, right? He was like us. He was the humblest of servants. Again, being the way, the truth, and the life, he is a model for us. And so the fact that he was like, God's will was through him, it's like, yes, he's very much revered, but he's also like washing our feet. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's
the suffering servant. Yeah.
Sure. And the way, they discuss Jesus in these passages here, it just makes me see, like, that poker game analogy in the Law of One. It's like Jesus knows all the cards. He's the one that knows all the cards. And instead of using it to control and manipulate and destroy his opponents, the rest of us,
Or get rich. Yeah.
or get rich,
Yep.
it's a way shower. he's,
Yeah.
you
That's
know,
beautiful. Yeah, thank you. That all makes perfect sense. Keith, did you have any thoughts, reflections on anything here?
Yes, the first thought I have is to express gratitude to you, Jay, for posing this question. Uh, because it uncovers so many things. The first thing that leaps out at me is the recurring theme that this, it doesn't say in this passage, but I believe I'm accurate in saying from other logos materials that it's a fourth density
Yes.
wander that
Yes.
has has selected this as a theme. And
Yes.
the first thing that came to mind when I saw that, because I hadn't thought about that in the context of the send off we were talking about earlier. So I was just creating this whole like cinematic narrative where like I don't want to make it a gender. I wish we had like they're like hanging out with their buddies in fourth density, and they're like looking at, oh, he's got them looking, oh, he's gonna do it again. I know.
He's gonna do it again.
What do you need, man? I know you're gonna do it. What can we do for you? Okay, I'll be the little kid when we're 6 years old. Okay, I'll do that for you, all right? That kind of thing. And the really the way shower thing also leapt out at me in that it's the distortion that we have that treats that property as one of hierarchical leadership. And out of that creates this concept of substitutional atonement that we commonly think of when we think about the crucifixion. And what he's saying is, this is the way that you too can go. Not this is the way and you guys can't do it, so okay, I'll be a substitutional sacrifice for you. But it's not surprising, given it's not surprising that the interpretation, I'll say, won the day, because that the whole tradition he was participating in that time was about substitutional, was, with the Passover, right? It's about the sacrificial one. So it's understandable how in third density we would bring it, we would understand it in that way. But this, the way that the law of one material illuminates it is just so beautiful and, illuminating. And then one last thing is just a reminder that how of the absence of the premise of judgment in all of the law of one materials. When we talk, for example, we're talking earlier about karma. Even in that passage, I think in third density, we understand karma. We understand karma from a lens of judgment, but it was really just the wheel of life. This is just right action. It's just the nature of the universe, not a judgment, right? So if you, I know that that's been very helpful for me to identify things or ways of looking at things or belief that have a valence of judgment. And, oh, wait, where does this come from, right? And always question that.
Yeah, thank you. Once again, all three of you are bringing up points that I really hadn't thought of, hadn't looked at it that way, and appreciate it. And I hope our viewers are enjoying it too. I would like to take a closer look at this idea of sacrifice, and particularly how it pertains to what we call the archetypical mind. The archetypical mind has been described as like the blueprint for our third density experience. It's basically like a map that shows you the whole layout of the metaphysical terrain. So sacrifice apparently is something that goes down to the very, very blueprints of our third density experience. So I wanted to read a couple passages here. The first one is from March 13th, 1988. Quo says, "The one known as Jesus the Christ wished to offer to all of humankind the symbol of the path which all must travel in some fashion in order to become the love of the Father and to express that love to others. The nature of the sacrifice of the life and the mundane world was exemplified as this entity sacrificed all that one may have, the life, knowing that it lived not of this world, but of a greater world. And by making the sacrifice in such a dramatic and fulfilling manner, there was instilled then within those whose hearts are turned toward the truth of love, the path boldly and brilliantly blazed, so that there could be no doubt as to the nature of the journey and the value of the sacrifice. Another passage from March 31st, 1996. The one known as Jesus or Jehoshua was an entity which was able to gain a great deal of understanding of the nature of this illusion in which all an entity has of a physical, mental, and emotional nature as sacrificed in order that the entity of third density might be reborn to a new level of being. This density was seen by this entity as that which offers itself in sacrifice to all who move through it. All the illusions they experience and the very fabric of this density exist in order that each entity which moves through it might be able to become transformed by the experience. To me, a lot of what I'm seeing here really kind of calls back to what they were saying before, that this entity known as Jesus, this wanderer, remembered more than most people do who forget all of this stuff when we go behind the veil. So this entity knew that it lived not of this world, but of a greater world, and was willing to sacrifice himself in this way to show everyone else that as well, hence the whole concept of the way shower. Joanna, did you have any thoughts on anything here?
Yeah, I love this imagery of him being kind of like the hanged man on the tarot card, which of course is a
That's the passage we're going to look at next. Yeah,
yeah.
sure.
I think it's also, again, because he is the way, the truth, and the life, he's our model. And I feel that these bodies, these avatars that we are privileged to occupy and travel through third density and experience all these things that they speak in these passages about the significance of our experiences, this is also a sacrifice. This body, this personality that we have developed is a sacrifice for our soul. And there's different ways you can look at that. You could look at it as a victim and be like, but why? I don't want to do that. Why am I feeling all this pain or whatever? But I think as an adept or as somebody who's waking up to the fact that it's a gift, it's a learning lesson, it's like what Jesus was able to know and understand that allowed him to fulfill his mission. When we wake up to it, we also start to be able to do our mission and to do the positive work, especially as a wanderer, if you identify as such, that this is just our body. It's not the end of everything. And it's our sacrifice. It's why we're here.
Yeah, such an important point that cannot be overemphasized. And I think we are going to emphasize it when we look at that tarot image of the hanging man. We'll do that after these. Keith, did you have any thoughts to share on these two passages? Anything you're seeing here in particular?
I think I'm gonna hold off on these thoughts until we get to the next. I think I'm seeing a lumping. I'm a lumper, so
Nice.
I see a lumping opportunity on the horizon, so I'm gonna wait.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. I was thinking about reading that passage, but it's a pretty long one, and it just seemed like reading all three of these might be a bit much. Rhonda, did you have anything you wanted to share on this before we look at that other passage?
You know what? I might be the same with Keith. I might wait until after we get to the hangman card. I have one. I did want to. Well, maybe I go ahead. I wanted to see, and this remind me of like, first off, Joanna, I love the fact that you're talking about it in your actual physical body, because I sometimes will skip that part, and it's so important to actually think that being in this container body is part of it. But I always like jump to it in terms of like ego or concept of yourself being sacrificed so that a new self can come into being, or a higher self. But I have this book that's like on the hangman card section. It has this one little line. It says, "By sacrificing all that I have been, I've inherited the state of my future being." And that concept of like, you can't be who you're going to be until you let go of who you are, in a sense.
Nice. Yeah, it really is a whole nother way of looking at your life to think of just incarnating in third density as being an act of sacrifice in itself, which is a great segue into this.
Can I add something to that really quickly since I
Yeah.
did? I can't remember.
Yeah.
Every time I hear that metaphor being used or that premise, Rhonda, being offered, I think this thought that I've had a long time, which is the progression of the caterpillar to the butterfly is like one of the greatest gifts that sort of energetic being has given to us, because it's a living example of not.
Yeah.
In order to gain the state of the butterfly, you have to completely give up the state of the caterpillar.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great observation and a beautiful metaphor for sure. And something I think we're going to see again when we look at transformation. But for now, let's take a look at that passage about the significator of the body. This is part of the archetypical mind of which we spoke earlier. On February 13th, 2010, Quo said, "The body is an instrument of sacrifice. When a brand new life is brought forth into your world, it has chosen to leave a place of full awareness where all is known that can be known, in order to plunge itself into the thoroughgoing system of illusions that you call physical life. Implicit in that infant advent into the world of earth is its eventual departure from that same earth world. It is a time spent in what this instrument would call the valley of the shadow of death. Being born into physical incarnation is that which is done responsibly and carefully, with great thought and for a reason. Entities such as those to whom we speak do not tumble into life with no thought for the shape and texture of the life to come. Many of those, indeed, virtually all of those who have come into incarnation in the past little while, have done so with great hope of being able to be part of the good upon planet Earth at this time. It is a time when, as this instrument would put it, the fields are ripe with harvest. And as incarnation is contemplated, there is the hope in each breast that they may be harvesters, that they may know and see and understand the centrality of love, that they may reach out during their time here to change darkness to light, sadness to joy, fear to love, dissension to unity, anger to peace, that they may be agents of the truth which every cell of every body carries within it, and which within the illusion of third density earth is veiled from the conscious awareness of each person who has come into incarnation. We would say to the one known as T1 that it is a sacrifice of tremendous meaning. It is not the idiot play of chaotic chance, nor is it the soulless repetition of destiny in which free will has no part. It is the dance of the entity that is upon the wheel of life, enjoying the darkness and the light, the dark night of the soul, and the illumination of epiphany, moving from transformation to transformation. It is the hope and the intention of the soul before entering into the valley of the shadow, that within those shadows, paradoxes, and mysteries of life as experienced upon your planet, there will be that moment of remembrance of why this sacrifice was undertaken. And it is hoped that that moment of remembrance may so illumine the soul within incarnation that the remainder of the incarnation will be one of joy, peace, and bliss. For the mists have been penetrated, the mystery has been solved, and the answer to sacrifice is love. For love moved each of you to embrace this experience, this parenthesis in eternity, as the one known as Joel calls it. And within this tiny shape of a life, this momentary span of your years, once you have awakened to the love within you, you have the opportunity so to shape and intend and offer your life that the riches of that love shall spring forth anew each day, falling like coins from your pockets and turning your world into heaven. Such a beautiful passage, so profound and meaningful, so many different layers to it. There was another podcast episode on the archetypical mind where we went more into detail into this particular passage and this particular archetype. Otherwise, yeah, I think it is just a really beautiful way of illustrating what has been mentioned before, which is that entering into incarnation and third density is a sacrifice. And if you look at the figure of the hanging man there, you'll see that his leg is crossed. And yes, if you study the archetypal mind, you'll see that there's 21 images altogether. And there is a recurring theme of entities with crossed legs or crosses or 90-degree angles. And it refers to what was said in that earlier passage. The horizontal line represents heaven and earth, metaphysical plane, and the horizontal axis represents the physical plane. So it is a representation of transcending what we see as the physical world, and this person is sacrificing himself to show that there is more to the world than we think, as was mentioned in previous passages. Keith, any thoughts, reflections on anything here?
Yes, the choice, sacrifice, and the martyrdom choice. I'll say the martyrdom choice. It's hard to really talk about this in this density, but I guess all of this stuff is hard to talk about in this density. So why did I say that? That's redundant. But the thing that that occurred to me in the previous passage and this passage is not really an answer to anything, and I don't expect an answer, but I have a constant wonder about the choice of the spirit through which Yeshua came, and that choice of martyrdom, and having it come from fourth density, and knowing what I know about other parts of the Law of One material that talk about the choice of martyrdom perhaps not being part of fifth density, meaning fifth density as the density of wisdom, where the act of martyrdom is perhaps not considered wise. Again, I say it out loud because it's a paradox to me, and it's a mystery to me.
Yeah, I know what your passage you're referring to, and that is something that I remain somehow a little bit unconvinced on with regard to this entity.
Yeah.
Because those entities you're talking about seem to refer to, let's just say, ordinary people who martyr themselves, whereas if they had let themselves live longer, they could have done more of their mission and service to others. And somehow I'm thinking the way Jesus sacrificed himself here, the point wasn't to extend his lifespan.
There it is.
The act of it was the sacrifice.
You illuminated this for me, Jonathan. So what I'm hearing, the way this is landing to me now is that martyrdom in the fourth density context probably does not have a word. So, and that the distinction that you're making is martyrdom out of a third density understanding is that perhaps which is not wise, looked at from the fifth density perspective. But this, what we look at as martyrdom, is not really doesn't fit the word. We don't have a word for it, right? For that.
Well, I think what I meant was that martyrdom in Jesus's case is a little bit different from martyrdom in like anyone else's case. This person was an exceptional entity.
Right. And so, I mean, it doesn't clear up the whole mystery, but it's one of those things that is comes up as a recurring thing for me, and this passage is another example of how that. Now, and just one last comment on this. But the other thing that arises once I get to that point in whatever gears are turning backwards in my brain, is that at the same time the third density is there to enable a specific kind of experience, and that the nature of that experience is no better or worse than any other experience that all that is gets to use to know more of itself. So in that sense, again, that's just another breadcrumb. I don't know what to do with it. It's not really part of a recipe that makes a meal, but
But if you're from New Orleans, I want to know the recipe for sure.
I'll get back to you on that, John.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing your thoughts, as always. Rhonda, any thoughts, reflections on this passage?
Well, I think for all of us, it's nice to think about the fact that this particular time that we're here on this planet is an important time. And that's mentioned there where it says, great hope of being able to be a part of the good upon the planet at this time. And to me, it's a good reminder. It's a great way to get out of once like you have discovered this material and you're again kind of working through it and discovering that you can get out of that victim mentality, that things aren't happening to you, that you chose to be here. That's a huge empowering thing. And Joanna, I don't know if I've talked about this with you before, but in our retreats, I think it's also helpful if you to really spend some time in meditation. And if you consider yourself a wanderer, to claim that. I think there's some benefit. Joanna helped me in one of her sessions in Seattle to do that. And since I have, because I was similar to her, didn't want to take that on, even though I had been studying law one for a long time, it kind of made sense. But I didn't want to claim that in a sense of feeling like I was more than or better than, or whatever that might mean. And I certainly can't tell you like what density I think I'm from or anything like that. But I would say just to empower myself that I believe I took on a mission to be here at this time, no matter how much I knew or forgot that I know. And it's important that that can help lead to this last statement. The more you claim that and spend time kind of becoming aware and awake, then you can come to this last statement where your life can become more joyful, peaceful, blissful. Yeah.
Yeah, so beautiful. I appreciate your sharing that. Joanna, any thoughts wanted to share? Reflections?
Yeah, I too found this passage incredibly beautiful, especially the description of how nobody just plunges themselves into this incarnation without much thought. And I think sometimes as service to others, entities, we forget about the other side, and for me, I love to think about the other side because that was one of the best things I loved about the law of one is that there's no good or bad, everything is in service. And so I'm thinking about the entities that incarnate on our planet to serve as catalysts, like that little boy that Jesus killed, right? Like that is a sacrifice. You're sacrificing a life lived in a maybe negative way so that you can catalyze others so that they can see love. Like because of that philosophy, I had a narcissist father, and I still do. He's still alive. But envisioning him like coming into this life as a narcissist, that's a hard life to consistently need that narcissistic supply to feel good about yourself, and it's not even real. It's just a terrible life to lead. And so to think that he chose that as a way to catalyze me, right? How it says, once you have awakened to the love within you, it says in this passage, how do you awaken but through the service of a negative entity, right? Like negative circumstances. And that is a service. So he's done a service to me by sacrificing himself in a life lived as a narcissist. Of course, he's very dedicated to his role, and he doesn't
Rarely breaks character.
he does not break character, so he doesn't see things this way. But it's my way to get to that place of forgiveness and forgiving myself and all of those things that we talked about earlier. So I think it's important to think about too how the negative people around are they're sacrificing themselves as well to serve as catalysts for all of us.
It's beautiful. I had not thought of it that way, but for sure. I really want to highlight perhaps what Rhonda said, I believe, which is that, yeah, it's about remembering that each of us did choose to come here to incarnate for a reason and to choose to go through everything that we did. But as Quo says, most people forget that. That's the risk you take of taking that leap behind the veil of forgetting. You can forget everything that you intended to come here to do. So it's what I love about this passage. It's really a reminder that we all came here as a reason. We all came here to help the planet in whatever way we can. And that a lot of it really comes down to just being who you are and trying to remember what your own mission is. Let's talk a little bit about transformation and resurrection. This picture reminds me of the cocoon and the caterpillar and the butterfly that I think Keith was talking about not too long ago. In session 80, question 20, the questioner is, can you tell me what the 20th archetype would be? Ra, I am Ra. That which you call the sarcophagus in your system may be seen to be the material world, if you will. This material world is transformed by the Spirit into that which is infinite and eternal. The infinity of the Spirit is an even greater realization than the infinity of consciousness. For consciousness, which has been disciplined by will and faith, is that consciousness which may contact intelligent infinity directly. There are many things which fall away in the many, many steps of adepthood. We of Ra still walk these steps and praise the one infinite creator at each transformation. So this is archetype 20. This is the transformation of the spirit, which to me, I mean, everyone looks at the Egyptian tarot and archetypical mind differently, but this clearly seems to be a body that was in a sarcophagus that is being born again or being transformed into new life, which I think, again, really just kind of calls back to the imagery that we saw of Jesus. The whole point of the sacrifice was to show people that there is more to life than the material world, and that if you are willing to go so far as to sacrifice yourself with love, you will live on. Life does not end with the death in this world. Rhonda, any thoughts, reflections on this passage?
I think you said a lot right there with about the I think it's looking at just the symbolism, like that they're in like that square box, I think is important, and that they are very clear, and that's the material world. So the more you see that in the archetypes, I think seeing those boxes are square shapes, it's helpful to connect those imagery too.
Indeed. I think there was another passage I had intended to read after this one. Let me take a look, see if you have anything to say on that. This was from March 31st, 1996. Thus, the one known as Jesus wished to offer itself as one who provided a pattern or model of beingness that delineated the nature of sacrifice and transformation, that there was indeed no death which would end the experience of consciousness in this illusion, that there was the possibility of using the illusion about one as a means by which one could give and receive love from all other entities according to the desire or choice made within one's own being, no matter the circumstances without the self. Thus, the one known as Jesus was able to offer its own life as an example of the kind of transformation possible for each entity within this illusion. Thus, this entity used the illusion for a greater purpose than becoming any kind of king or power within the illusion. This entity offered a means through the illusion and beyond the illusion as it explored and shared the love of the one creator in a pure and undistorted fashion. Kind of this whole archetype here is about transformation of the spirit. Rhonda, did you have anything to add to that, or should we go to Joanna?
I think we can go to Joanna. I think that's, yeah.
Joanna, any thoughts, reflections on either of these?
I just really love that part where it was saying that Jesus didn't become a king, because the transformation is happening in the spirit, and that has nothing to do with all of this physical stuff. And again, I keep saying it because it's always popping up, is that he is the way. So we look to Jesus as that example, and the kind of, like it says, the transformation he chosen for himself to model for us is one that isn't physical. It's spiritual, in the spirit.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Well said. Keith, any thoughts, reflections on either of these two passages?
No, if I have a lot to add specifically on this passage, I do have something that arose for me, Joanna, as you were sharing on the last passage about the necessity to have the catalyst or contrast in order to allow for those, in your case, service to others to emerge. And I have this aphorism that I like to share just because I think it's so just poetic. And it is, in the absence of that which you are not, that which you are is not. And it is so profound for me that I like to share it whenever I find it apt. And it's
Say it
not,
again, Keith.
in the absence of that which you are not, that which you are is not. That actually comes from the Conversations with God material, and the reason why I like it so much is because it so exemplifies what the law of one refers to as catalyst, meaning in order for you to bring forth the qualities that you seek to be, you have to have a contrast, or else you can't be that. In the absence of that which you want the contrast to, there can be no expression of what you want to be. Because if what you want to be is all you see, you have no opportunity to be it, because it's everywhere. So
That's fascinating. Yeah.
I just find it poetic and powerful and useful and
Nice.
very consistent. And I find that it says in many fewer words how it's said in lots of other teachings in many more words, but this very same premise.
Thank you. Yeah, that's beautiful. I did want to talk a little bit more about the resurrection because I think many might be curious about the nature of what seemed to be Jesus' resurrected body. So there are a couple passages where they do speak to this. On April 2nd, 1995, a person named Kay asked, "Could you describe the nature of the resurrection body that Jesus appeared in after leaving the tomb?" The body which rose and walked from a cave was that body which this entity and all entities inhabit when they have not become incarnate, and they are yet within the inner planes. The closest we might come to a general description would then be the electrical body, or the metaphysical body. It is a body which is far more densely filled with light, and therefore is able to coexist with the third density illusion. You may relate this kind of body to, we search this instrument's knowledge for the closest manifestation and find this entity has seen the so-called psychic surgery and has seen such manifestations of electrical or form-making occurrences. They are indistinguishable from normal, physical, illusory bodies. However, their actual arena of living and working is within what we would call the metaphysical universe. And on December 14th, 1986, a person named H asks, immediately after Christ resurrected from the tomb, was his body solid or would it pass through doors like a vapor? Quo says, I am Quo. The entity known as Jesus, at the time of that known as the resurrection, was able to channel the love of the Father or the Logos to such an extent that it was able to manifest the structure of its physical vehicle in a way which filled it with light, so that it was able to manifest both the characteristics of your third density illusion when appropriate, and able to refine its focus of light to the point of being able to move through what you would see as solid material of your third density illusion. I don't really have a whole lot to say about either of these passages. I just think it's an interesting way to explain what was described in the Bible. And I guess just saying that this is a body that was filled with so much light that it had both the qualities of light and physical matter, which enabled it to do unusual things, I guess. Joanna, did you have any thoughts on either of these passages or anything about this part of the resurrection?
Nothing really other than to say it sounds like he leveled up.
That would be a very good way to say it.
Yeah.
Keith, anything to add?
Well, just that another question arises that I was about to search the law material before, and whether in the other instances where the spirit, this fourth density entity, came to other third density planets, is that the pattern that emerges each time? Is that just part of the
That's a great question. I would think if the crucifixion is there, then the resurrection kind of has to be there in some form, because that's the whole point of the mission, to
Yeah,
show those entities that death is not the end.
yeah, yeah. I can imagine it happening in a bunch of different ways, but yeah, I can. Anyway, it's just a question that I think none of us have an answer to. But I'm going to search.
No, that's a great question. Yeah, for sure. Rhonda, did you have any thoughts on anything here?
Yeah, I love thinking about this concept of what this means to the resurrected body. There's actually a great book that called Rainbow Body, Resurrection and Spiritual Attainment. So the Catholic Church actually paid Father Tiso to go study this concept of the rainbow body in Buddhism and whether it was connected to the resurrection. And it seems to be, I mean, that book is great because there's lots of just, again, places where maybe Jesus was in his travelers in those hidden days, and some concepts that seem that maybe some Buddha, maybe there was some overlap in some concepts with Jesus and Buddhism. But also this idea of that there's something to moving from, and we know we talk about in the Law of One that there's a different type of body when you're in fourth density versus third density, and that ability. This says it's kind of in between the planes, between incarnations. But anyway, just thinking about the physical aspect of our, that there's something important about this actual container we're in, and that it actually, as we absorb more light and love, it actually changes or has ability to change too. It's very fascinating to me, the scientific, that there's maybe some scientific stuff around that.
A science that does not exist yet.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about what is called the second coming. I have 3 passages I wanted to look at. The first was from the Raw Contact Session 17, question 22. Questioner asks, in our culture, there is a great saying that he will return. Can you tell me if this is planned? Ra says, I am Ra. I will attempt to sort out this question. It is difficult. This entity became aware that it was not an entity of itself, but operated as a messenger of the one creator whom this entity saw as love. This entity was aware that this cycle was in its last portion and spoke to the effect that those of its consciousness would return at the harvest. The particular mind-body-spirit complex you call Jesus is, as what you would call an entity not to return, except as a member of the Confederation, occasionally speaking through a channel. However, there are others of the identical congruency of consciousness that will welcome those to the fourth density. This is the meaning of returning. On December 14th, 1986, a J who is not me asks, have there been further incarnations of the entity known as Jesus upon the planet Earth? Quo says, I am Quo, and we find that there have not been, my brother. May we speak further? J asks, will there be another incarnation of this entity on the planet Earth? Quo says, I am Quo, and we find that it is not the entity known as Jesus that shall appear again, but the Christed consciousness, which shall move through those of your population which have prepared a place for this consciousness. And on March 13th, 1988, Carla said, I noticed that you said something about Christ and then called it Christ consciousness also. Do you see those two terms as interchangeable? Quo says, for the most fastidious of considerations, there could be seen to be a difference between one who holds an office and the office itself. And yet the nature of this office is such that any which moves into unity with the Father that this office signifies becomes then that office. Thus, for the consideration of those who find this entity in its station or office holy, we would not make a differentiation. I really like that idea, the analogy of the person who holds the office and the office itself. That would be like, the presidency or the vice presidency. There's a difference between the person who happens to be president at this time and the office of the presidency. And I think that's what they're saying about Christ and Christ consciousness. The entity that we know as Jesus was just one incarnation of Christ consciousness. But that office of Christ consciousness could be held by anyone who does hold that same consciousness. And according to 722, there will be many more of those coming at harvest time, which is about now. Keith, do you have any thoughts on any of this stuff?
Yeah, that distinction between the office and the office holder works for service to others, but doesn't quite work the way for service to self, as I think as we were living through.
Well, I don't think folks on service to self path would really be in Christ's.
Oh, no, I'm not. Yeah, I agree. I didn't make that comment intimating that a service to self would be exhibiting Christ consciousness. I was just talking about that aspect of the explanation where they were.
Oh, you mean there's no analog on the service to self path?
There's no, like, I mean, je suis d'état, I think, je suis d'état, I think that's what Napoleon said, right? I am the state. So,
well, if there was an antichrist, I suppose there could be an argument made that there's an antichrist consciousness.
Highly polarized service to self entity would say, but that distinction between the office and the office holder and Christ consciousness is I can't recall whether I came across this in the raw material or not, but the idea that the Christ consciousness, the office, is like part of the planetary logos, and that the entity that came to exhibit, who lived as Yeshua, I was saying Yeshua early, in I think the law.
I think that's another way to say it too, or Yehoshua.
Yeah. So the Christ, the fourth density entity that came and incarnated as Yeshua was holding the office of this Christ consciousness that is part of the planetary logos, which is, I'm sometimes when I cross too many streams, I get confused, but I don't think it's detrimental to imagine it that way, especially the way that the Law of One material explains it. And this is my first time encountering it, distinction between the office and the office holder, because that same entity could provide that same experience on a different planetary logos, and it would be holding that office at that time, right?
Yeah.
I guess I would just like to imagine it that way, so indulge me.
Yeah, oh, that's a great way. Again, another thing I had not thought of. Rhonda, any thoughts, reflections on anything here?
Well, that's interesting. Keith has had me think about it a different way too. And then if you tie it back to when they say Jesus is returning, and they say, well, only maybe as a member of the Confederation, like a role in the Confederation. Interesting enough. But I think it's interesting on this first passage when it talks about those of your population which have prepared a place for this consciousness. I thought that was beautiful because I think it ties very much back to the verse when Jesus says, I go to prepare a place for you, a place. I go to prepare a place for you, and if it were not so, I would not have told you. So I think there's a connection there, and it might be worth a little contemplation.
That's a really interesting point. I had not made that connection. That's beautiful. Joanna, anything to add?
Yeah. First of all, I love the whole idea of Jesus Christ coming back as the Christ consciousness, because as someone who was deeply immersed in the whole rapture and repentance and all of that, I was able to kind of integrate that idea of Jesus coming back. But in thinking about this, especially with all that focus on the body and everything, it's interesting that those types of Christians that are very dogmatic, they are sticking to this like physical representation of Jesus, of God, and they can't let go of the physicality of it all. So you see Jesus on the cross, like mutilated, versus just the cross being what it symbolizes. And it's just interesting to me that it's so ingrained in the physicality of Jesus's return. And so, like Wanda was saying, if there's not a place in your heart to welcome Christ consciousness, you're not going to see it. And so the people who are waiting for this physical Jesus to return, they're actually not even going to see the return of Christ consciousness. That's why they a lot of times it seems like they're so lacking of love, because they can't, it's just not in their vibration,
Yeah, that's a really interesting way to look at it. Again, had never thought of that, but that makes perfect sense. Let's take a closer look at Christ consciousness and what is Christ consciousness. I have 3 passages that I wanted to share. They're all on the shorter side, I think. First one, December 9th, 2001, Quo says, when a third density entity allows or surrenders to that ineffable energy of unconditional love, which has often been called Christ consciousness, then the experiencer of this love vibration is dwelling, unknown to herself oftentimes, in fourth density. That quality of love, when the veil is removed, simply places one in a fourth density environment. In this fourth density environment, the social memory complex is alive and well because the nature of consciousness in fourth density allows that pattern, and that pattern is a model that is higher than or that will replace the lower density when there is the awareness to see the higher density. On May 7th, 2006, Quo said, you are only one being, but you have within you consciousness. That consciousness is what this instrument would call Christ consciousness. It is the consciousness of unconditional love. Go looking for that consciousness. Ask for help in finding that consciousness. Your guidance system is just waiting for you to ask for help. The angels that surround you are breathless with anticipation that you will remember them and call for them. They love you with a love that we cannot describe to you. It is the love of the one Creator. They are bits of that consciousness, uncreated, sent forth in purity, unable to enter incarnation, and able only to help when asked by incarnated beings such as yourself. Remember to ask for that help. Lastly, December 9th, 2001, Quo says, this flashing of fourth density is a magical thing. It is a matter of the state of mind of the person, and it is extraordinarily difficult to talk about that state of mind. But belief and faith are a state of mind. Perhaps we could even say that knowing is a state of mind. If one knows that something is true, that person becomes able to demonstrate that truth. It is the depth of the knowing that creates the state of mind which opens the gateway to intelligent infinity and allows that Christ consciousness energy its freedom of passage. And when that energy is flowing freely, even if that entity has no idea of what is occurring, the planet itself and the people around that entity will feel the light shine, will feel the warmth that is radiated, and will be drawn towards that light and that gentleness of energy that moves with those who are full of love. Yeah, beautiful passages, and I think it's really just kind of stating in no uncertain terms that Christ consciousness is the consciousness of unconditional love. And unconditional love is what fourth density is all about. So this entity incarnated 2,000 years ago to show us where we are now, 2,000 years later, ready to make that leap of graduation from third density to density of unconditional love. But that each of us has that consciousness within us, and to the degree that each of us learns how to love unconditionally, everyone, including the ones we find hardest to love, that's what helps bring in this future that we're all dreaming of. Rhonda, did you have any thoughts, reflections on any of this stuff?
I had a couple of things as you were reading it that came to my mind, so I'm going to try to, it's not something I thought of ahead of time when I read the material, so let me try to piece it together. But that very last passage, well, first, it's so beautiful to think that we're asked to have help, and so many people are around us, so many beings and entities. That second passage there, I mean, just that's, thank you for even sharing that with us, because it's such a great reminder. But I'm thinking of this concept of fourth density and being able to be in it for a period of time without maybe even knowing that you're in it. And a great example of this, I believe, is when Jesus is walking on the water and Peter walks out to him. You know, and if you recall the story, that Jesus, it's the knowing faith. One way to describe faith is, when you do a dissecting of that word, faith is something that you believe it so much, it's kind of like a floor that you put your foot down and the floor is going to be there concept. And so it's always, and that always takes me back to that story of Peter walking on the water and being able to do it, which to me is the example, again, going back, kind of tying a lot of what we talked about together, as Jesus is a way shower. Most everything he did, he trained his disciples to do as well. And just thinking about that ability to know something and to know that we are, I think the knowing sometimes that we can always go back to when things are hard is that knowing that we are so well loved and that we can just put our foot in the unknown, and that it'll be okay.
So well said. Yeah, it is a beautiful thing to contemplate, especially at this time of year. Joanna, did you have any thoughts on anything here?
Yeah. After I read that first passage, I was like, oh, it's like being high, like you're high in 4D. But seriously though, then the last passage where it says, that you would just be so full of love that you just radiate God. It made me think of this beautiful thing that Walt Whitman wrote as a part of his preface of this book, and I just like to read it because it's amazing. He says, "This is what you shall do. Love the earth and sun and the animals. Despise riches. Give alms to everyone that asks. Stand up for the stupid and crazy. Devote your income and labor to others. Hate tyrants. Argue not concerning God. Have patience and indulgence toward the people. Take off your hat to nothing known or unknown or to any man or number of men. Go freely with powerful, uneducated persons and with the young and with the mothers of families. Re-examine all you have been told at school or church or in any book. Dismiss whatever insults your own soul, and your very flesh shall be a great poem. And have the richest fluency not only in its words, but in the silent lines of its lips and face, and between the lashes of your eyes, and in every motion and joint of your body." I mean, it's so beautiful because it's really kind of ties into everything we've talked about here about the body being a sacrifice. And in this case, your very flesh could be a poem, right? And I feel like that is, and all the things he describes here is very 4D, and how that can make your flesh poetry. And it really kind of resonates in the last part of this passage saying that you will radiate.
That's what Quo said in one of those passages a while back, that Jesus wanted to live his life as a poem to the Creator.
Amazing.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That was Walt Whitman, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if I remember my high school English, he was considered a transcendentalist, one of the writers of the Transcendental movement, which is, of course, about everything that we've been talking about here, transcending and getting higher to fourth density, which is literally higher than third density. Keith, any thoughts on anything here?
Thank you, Rhonda, for recalling that passage. I guess it was in Matthew, right? Or anyway, whichever gospel was in about Peter, which brought thoughts about the premise that all is vibration or resonance, and that in the presence of Jesus, Peter was able to resonate with that fourth density experience or fourth density manifestation, if you want to put it that way. I don't know what the big fancy word might be, but that ties together with other thoughts that come as I'm consuming the raw material and giving it and contemplating and sort of thinking on it. And it also ties, to me, I draw a line between that and the prior passage about the second coming. And no, the second coming is not going to be what you think. It's when we genuinely accept the teaching about the way showing teaching, and that we walk in that way and thereby express ourselves in the way that is resonant with that fourth density.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, indeed. That's a great way to say it. Did I cut you off? Were you still finishing train of thought?
That was all I intended to say.
So beautiful. Panelists have really, really enjoyed this conversation, have really enjoyed hearing your perspectives. And as always, I've learned a lot from you and thought of things that I hadn't thought of and seen things in a way that I had not seen before. I would like to go ahead and bring this little time together to a close. and take a look at perhaps where do we go from here. After everything that we've talked about for the last couple hours, here are some things that you could consider perhaps as good takeaway lessons. First of all, Jesus was a way shower, as we have said many times. That was his primary mission, to show us all that there's more to life than we think it is, and that love and sacrificial life is the key to the next step in our evolution. Meaning that sacrifice is sacred, and it's not just Jesus' sacrifice, but all of us came here. All our incarnations can be seen as sacrifices, meaning everything that you do here can be sacred, can be an offering, can be done in the name of love and unconditional love. And third, that yes, Christ consciousness is the consciousness of unconditional love, which is the consciousness of fourth density, the next step in our spiritual evolution, if our friends in the Confederation are to believe. So becoming more like that and learning how to swim in the waters of unconditional love, as they said one time, would be very helpful in helping you progress into the future you are destined for. And lastly, we all have the Christ within us. We all have the consciousness of unconditional love within us. And that is part of our mission, our goal for this incarnation, to learn how to manifest that in our own way. Panelists, did anybody have any thoughts they wanted to share on this as far as takeaway lessons before we have a little pop quiz?
Beautiful.
Not calling on anybody in particular. If anybody does, that would be great. If not, yeah, we got just enough time for a pop quiz. Any last thoughts? Anybody?
Yeah, I suppose I do. I was mulling over whether I would say it, but just as part of those takeaways, you have the Christ within you, and a way to further that in yourself is to be the catalyst for others to be more in that way as well. And you never know what catalyst, as far as the mystery, right? You never know what catalyst is going to get others closer to that or not. But that's just part of the mystery, I guess.
Indeed. Rhonda, Joanna, anything to add before we do a pop quiz?
Just that I'm just so fortunate that I have this version of Jesus in my life, and not like Jesus is the way, but it's Jesus is the way. Like he's not, you don't have to believe this to access God, but he sacrificed himself so that millions and billions of people can,
Indeed. Yeah, it's a beautiful thing that I think was said in one of those passages where he became the thing that he was seeking. He became creator. He channeled the creator's unconditional love to such a degree of purity that people who were in Jesus' presence felt that they were in the presence of God. What a beautiful thing. Rhonda, any last thoughts to share on this?
I'll just say this, remember, I think during this season, as we're about to celebrate Christmas, to remember that this flashing of fourth density is a magical thing. So, and remember going back to that first talking about Christmas and how it can be a magical, maybe be as a child. I think Jesus was said that all those who enter the kingdom of heaven must do so as a child. So maybe consider how you can be childlike this Christmas and experience the magic of fourth density.
What a beautiful callback. Well said. Thank you so much. And thank you all panelists so much. Really enjoyed the conversation. So because this episode is being posted just a couple weeks before Christmas, it seems only fitting that we should have a pop quiz about one of the best, most popular Christmas movies ever made. I am talking, of course, about Die Hard, starring Bruce Willis. Movie critics and fans alike may continue to debate whether or not Die Hard is a Christmas movie, but it does, without doubt, take place at a Christmas party, and that's good enough for this pop quiz. So I have 3 multiple choice questions about Die Hard movie. See how many you can answer correctly. Panelists, of course, as always, the points don't matter. If you had fun, you won. If you learned something interesting or funny about this movie that you can drop into a conversation later on, you won as well. Are you guys ready for your first question?
Sure.
All right. Your first question: who was first offered the part of John McClane before Bruce Willis? Was it A, Clint Eastwood, B, Robert De Niro, or C, Frank Sinatra? What do you think?
Do we just call it out?
Panelists, yeah, you can just shout out your answers.
I'm sure it's Clint Eastwood. I'm going to say
I'm
Clint
going A with Clint Eastwood,
All
yeah.
right, I'll say B just to be ironic.
Eastwood.
Nice. The correct answer, believe it or not, is C, Frank
Oh, wow.
Sinatra. The movie Die Hard was based on a 1979 crime novel called Nothing Lasts Forever, which is a sequel to a 1966 novel called The Detective. Because Frank Sinatra had starred in the big screen adaptation of The Detective, he legally had to be offered the role in its sequel. Being 73 years old at the time, he, of course, turned it down. And interestingly, Clint Eastwood actually owned the rights, the movie rights to Nothing Lasts Forever, which he had planned to star in the 1980s. That obviously did not happen. Studio executives, of course, wanted a big action star for the part. Rumor has it that Sylvester Stallone, Harrison Ford, Robert De Niro, Charles Bronson, Nick Nolte, Mel Gibson, Richard Gere, and more were offered the part. Up to that point, Bruce Willis had only been known as a comedic actor, not an action star, so that clearly changed after Die Hard. Pretty funny if you could try to imagine Clint Eastwood or Robert De Niro in that role. It definitely would have been different. And apparently, based on my research for this pop quiz, Bruce Willis improvised the line "Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker," and assumed it would be cut from the movie. And it turned out, of course, to be the most memorable line of all. Are you ready for your second question?
Mm-hmm.
Your second question. What building in LA was used as a stand-in for Nakatomi Plaza? Was it A, Fox Plaza, B, Bank of America Plaza, or C, Wilshire Grand Center?
I'm feeling pretty confident it's B.
Yeah, B.
Nice.
No idea, but I'm going to go B. That was what seemed to resonate when you first said them, but no idea.
It would make sense, but the correct answer, in fact, is A, Fox Plaza, which just happens to be the corporate headquarters for 20th Century Fox, the studio that actually made the movie. Turned out to be the perfect location for Nakatomi Plaza. And since it was still under construction at that time, there wasn't a whole lot they needed to do to the space to make it movie ready. And the studio even charged rent to itself and presumably paid rent to itself for whatever they did. Are you ready for your last question? Last question is this. Who was offered the part of Hans Gruber before Alan Rickman? Was it A, Sam Neill, B, Jeremy Irons, or C, Gary Oldman?
All the above.
C. He's a good villain.
Gary Oldman is a great villain. He would have been great at that role, yeah, for sure. Any other guesses?
I'm going to go A just to see what happens.
Nice. The correct answer is indeed A. Sam Neill was approached but ended up turning the film down. And then in the spring of 1987, the casting director saw Alan Rickman playing the villain in a stage production of Dangerous Liaisons and knew that they had found their Hans. And Die Hard was actually Rickman's first role in a feature film. So awesome. Anybody know what Die Hard movie Jeremy Irons was in? Because he was in a Die Hard movie.
Oh, wow. Okay. I didn't know that. Well, I haven't seen any. Is it okay if you say that? I haven't seen any of
Oh, you haven't seen any of them?
Well, I saw the first one. I'm sorry, any others than the first one. But I do feel
I've only saw the first one and saw it probably when it came out and haven't seen it since. So
Oh, interesting. Yeah. They're kind of violent. Yeah. Yeah. Not totally like non-violent for sure. But this was a great
want to raise
Christmas
to a
movie.
point of personal privilege. I know you didn't mention anything about Robert's Rules of Order here, but I feel necessary to note that you guys gave me a hard time about the Ghostbusters reference. That was only 4 years before this movie, okay?
Good point. Good point.
Yeah.
But there was a whole bunch more Die Hard movies, and Jeremy Irons was the villain in the third Die Hard movie, actually playing Hans Gruber's brother. That one was called Die Hard with a Vengeance.
Yeah, I honestly thought the Crossing the Streams themes had actually made it into popular culture, where I guess I guess not.
No,
I'm sure you can find it on YouTube if you're at all interested. I think it's fun.
Yeah.
no.
Across the street. Well, if it may, I tried to do a Ghostbuster reference with one I thought everyone would know. Who you gonna call?
Yeah. Who wouldn't
Yeah,
know?
it was a little kid, of course, like an 8-year-old. They don't know.
They have YouTube.
They know.
They should know.
Who gonna call?
I would call you guys anytime to do another episode. It has been super fun. You have been the best panel that we've had so far. And even though I say that to every other panel, I really mean it with you guys. It's been awesome. It's been super fun. All right, you guys want to say goodbye to our viewers and say thank you before we go, Joanna?
Thank you for sticking with us this whole time, if you have.
If
And
you have.
I hope that you come away with something that helps you to have your flesh be like a poem.
Nice. Keith, want to say goodbye? Thank you to our viewers.
Yeah, yippee-ki-yay. Oh, no, I can't say that.
You can say Merry Christmas, motherfuckers.
Oh, no, this has been fun. A lot of laughs, a lot of insight. Just grateful for having the time together. Thank you so much. And I hope those of you who are viewing it found something of value.
Rhonda?
Thank you so much. Thank you. Magical Christmas. That's all I can say. Hope you have one.
Oh, for sure. I want to thank you all for being here. It's been a pleasure and a joy. Thank you for all you've done and continue to do in service to others. To all our friends at L&O Research, thank you for all you've done and continue to do in service to others. And for all those of you watching on video sometime in the near or distant future, thank you for all you've done and continue to do in service to others. We are sending you our love and receiving yours as well. Until next time, in the love and light of the one infinite creator. Adonai. Namaste.